One thing in the wine business is family companies seem to continue to exist. I think the principal reason for that is alcohol has not gone out of fashion, particularly not great wines. Now, James suggested that I said a few words about my early introduction to port. Like most Englishmen, I was sent off to boarding school. For me, it was 11 years old. And I actually had a great friend called David Sandeman, who we were there together. He, of course, his family business was Sandeman Port. And I recall at the tender age of 13, going up to London with him to visit his brother, who worked at his family business, Sandeman Port. His brother was in a meeting at the time we arrived, so we were guided off to the tasting room and told to wait for him there. As you can imagine, two strapping 13-year-old lads needed no further encouragement, and we managed to taste our way through absolutely everything. Now, this was followed by lunch. Now, lunch, some of you may remember, lunch in London back in the mid-1970s basically involved a pint or two of warm beer and not very much food. So at the end of this exercise, I was what Lawrence Dallaglio, my good friend who's an English rugby player, called a little over-refreshed. Needless to say, despite that incident, I fell in love with port and then years later ended up in the port business. So let's talk about the 2003. So the idea, of course, of tasting this port now, the 2003 Taylor Fladgate, is because many people lay down ports for their children when their children are born in order to be able to enjoy that port when the child is 21. And of course, this wine will be 21 next year. And of course, the basis for this is that you hope that the child will turn out as good as the wine. Now, we still make port the traditional way, and that is treading on our grapes. The reason that we do this is because we have a very short period of time to make port. It's only 3.5 days from the moment we pick the grapes and then stop the fermentation with the addition of the neutral grape spirit. And that very short period of time means we have to really work those grape skins hard, treading on them, stomping on them, as you call it in America, and achieving that really through the use of the human foot against the granite base of these old lagars. And to give you some sort of idea of this process, each harvest we tread about 2,000 tons of grapes in 5 traditional wineries with a team of over 400 people. It's great fun to see. But we recently, in fact, opened at Crofts Quinta de Rueda some lagars where people can, in fact, come and visit, pay us to tread the grapes, and then buy the wine afterwards. So we get twice the money. It's a fantastic business. Now, these images were taken a few years ago, and as you can see, we're working hard at the stomping. Harvest, of course, is a celebration, and it's the culmination of an entire year's work in the vineyard. And whilst we do a lot of traditional dances, we also, as you can see here, do the chicken dance. Now, the Douro Valley is by far and away the most beautiful wine region in the world. And as you can see from this picture, it's a place where we have an absolutely stunning landscape. And it's also a place which people are increasingly coming to visit for themselves. This particular image here is Quinta de Vargelas, which is the main Taylor Fladgate property, and pretty much half of what's in this glass actually came from Quinta de Vargelas. What you can see in this image is these amazing dry stone walls, which are really a testament to the extraordinary creativity of man to turn these very steep hills into flat surfaces on which we can grow our vines. They're constantly in need of repair, and in fact, if I look across our entire estate, we've got well over 100 miles of terraces like this, each about 10 foot high. And it's because of this extraordinary effort of mankind that the Douro has become a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In the last few years, we've seen quite a record number of Americans coming to visit Portugal, and many have actually chosen to move to the country and live there permanently. This is not only because it is beautiful, it is in part because everybody speaks English. They're very friendly people, they all speak English, and that's because most people don't speak Portuguese, by the way. But for a final reason, it's because the Portuguese haven't really upset anybody in the world since about the 15th century, so it's a fairly safe place to be. They're also attracted by, not only by the amazing wines, but they're also about the great restaurants. And I'm quite pleased to stand here and be able to tell you that next year, Michelin will be publishing a guide just on Portuguese restaurants. Up until now, yeah, it's fantastic news. Up until now, Michelin has had Spain and Portugal. And the idea that we're now having a fantastic guide just to Portugal is a testimony to how much the food scene has improved. And indeed, James mentioned that we have our hotel, the Adrian, we have a 2-star Michelin there. We've also, for the last decade or so, won an award from the Wine Spectator for our Portuguese wine list. So we encourage you all to come. In fact, James and I were reminiscing that 25 years ago, when James started to come to Porto, there was absolutely nowhere to eat. And now, there's 6 Michelin-starred restaurants. There's probably another 15 that are able to reach that score. And it's a pleasure it's a place where Portuguese wines are beginning to really come of age, as well as the food. And as James mentioned, right in the heart of the city of Porto, we opened this new cultural district called the World of Wine, or WOW. And it does have probably the best museum wine experience in the world today. So I could encourage you to come. It's also got a cork museum, and many of you, and it explains the whole story of cork. Many of you may or may not be aware, but about 75% of the world's corks are actually produced from Portugal. It also has a chocolate experience explaining the entire way that chocolate is made. It has a small chocolate factory. And the reason for that is not because Portuguese invented chocolate, it's simply because port and chocolate, particularly dark chocolate, go incredibly well together. Now we must talk a little bit about the 2003 vintage. It was a year that started with fairly heavy rainfall after a couple of dry years. Flowering and everything else was in perfect condition. But you will recall that right across Europe in 2003, there was a heat wave. And in fact, in August, for the first 15 days of August of that year, we had temperatures up, peaking at about 110 degrees Fahrenheit, so a bit over 43 degrees centigrade. Fortunately for us in the Douro, we're used to those hot conditions. And it was not only hot during the day, it was hot at night. So I think our lowest temperatures recorded at nighttime were about 92 degrees. So it was one of those years to sit out under the stars with a glass of port. That heat really stopped the vines in their growing process and allowed them to concentrate on making the fruit. And James has mentioned also the Porto Protocol. I want to just, in parenthesis here, talk about the fact that 5 years ago we launched this initiative. I got Barack Obama to come to Porto to help launch it. It's an initiative where wineries and people in the wine industry across the entire value chain are really sharing solutions in order to everyone help to accelerate their climate activity and make change happen. And I think that given that the wine industry is incredibly impacted by climate change, but also because we tend to make our best wines from vines that were planted by a previous generation, we're also an industry that thinks intergenerationally. And I think that's hugely important when we look at solutions for climate change. Wine is also probably the only branded agricultural industry in the world. So I'm delighted that with over 400 wineries and players in the industry having joined the Porto Protocol, it demonstrates that wine itself can be a force for good. Now let's just get back to the 2003. perfect harvest conditions. We made lots of very good port. Immediately, the sort of concentration was evident in these wines with the deep colors of purple, the black cherry, and so on. Harvest had produced an above average crop, so we had plenty of things to choose from to make the final blend. And now, as a result, we get this rather stylish, dense wine with lots of plums, spices, hints of violets, if you can find that. That's always a trademark of a great Taylor Fladgate vintage. Tannins, beautifully silky, firm, good grip on the tongue. It's a little bit like having a heavenly liquid in the mouth, and it's not yet midday. Now, you'll also be aware that vintage port is often used to raise a toast to a great event, and it brings me to the story of wonderful dinners, and James mentioned Everest. Back in 2015, myself and some friends set out to actually create the highest black tie dinner party in the world. We had tables, chairs, plates, candles, cutlery. We had 2-star Michelin food prepared for us. In fact, it'll be the only time I probably ever have Michelin food in boil in the bag. We also had some great port as well. I took up some Taylor Fladgate 1952, which of course was the year that Everest was conquered. Anyway, long story short, that was the year of the avalanches. That was the year of the big earthquake, and the mountain was closed. We had to retreat back. We ate the food, we drank the port, we didn't waste that. We just had a very good dinner party at base camp. And of course, I want to raise a glass to all of you for listening. And finally, I want to leave you with this thought. And remember that port drinkers never get drunk. They simply become fortified. Enjoy your lunch.